Hey everyone, this is Ben with BathroomBrewsMTG. Welcome to Bathroom Brews, where I take bad ideas and turn them into $100 budget EDH decks. For the last deck of the holiday season, it also happens to be my first patron requested deck. Thank you so much for your support, Jen Sprell. They requested a snow-themed deck, so I created 5-color Chromat Snow. But much like having a Secret Santa, this deck has a secret commander, Rhymefeather Owl. It's a 7 mana, 5 generic, and 2 blue for a star snow creature bird with flying. Its power and toughness are equal to the number of snow permanents in play, and you can pay 1 generic and 1 snow to put an ice counter on target permanent. Permanents with ice counters on them are snow permanents. If you're a new player and want to learn more about snow, or just need a refresher, I have a link in the video description below you can go ahead and check out. And there's one last thing I want to say before we get into the rest of the video. Thank you to everyone who's been supporting me these past 2 months. To everyone who watches the video, likes, comments, subscribes, thank you. I never imagined I'd have nearly 200 subs in 2 months or Patreon support. It really means the world to me. Okay, let's get back into this video before I tear up. Using Rhymefeather Owl's effect, we can take normal creatures or permanents and make them into, well, snow permanents. But they need to have an ice counter on them. And what snow payoffs are worth making non-snow things into snow permanents? Well, we have cards like Abominable Treefolk, Coffner Worm, and Rhymefeather Owl. Each of these cards care about the number of snow permanents either we control or are on the battlefield in general. Treefolk and Rhymefeather get larger for each snow permanent either we or everyone controls, while having trample or flying respectively, and then we can pump Coffner Worm up for each snow permanent we control, and it is trample. That's pretty great. Narfi Betrayer King, Boreal Outrider, and Issa the Abominable provide us with additional value. Narfi buffs all our snow creatures, Boreal Outrider gives our creatures a +1/+1 counter if we spent colored snow mana to pay for any of their costs, and Isu lets us play snow cards from the top of our library, which is like drawing a card. Quick rules note, if a card says play, that means we can play lands and cast spells. If a card just says casts, then we can't play any lands. So playing will always include casting, but casting never includes playing. Next, we have Sculptor of Winter, Rhyme Tender, and Yorn, God of Winter. We can either untap a snow land, a snow permanent, or with Yorn, if we attack, untap every snow permanent. Yorn also has a backside, which we can cast, which we can then tap to play a snow permanent from our graveyard, but that card will enter the battlefield tapped this turn. There are also non-creature spells that care about snow mana being cast. Blessing of Frost, Blood on the Snow, and Tundra Fumarole are just a few examples. Blessing of Frost distributes X +1/+1 counters, where X the amount of snow mana spent to cast this spell. Then you draw a card for each creature with power 4 or greater. And considering all but 2 of our lands are snow lands, that means we should be putting 4 counters on all of our creatures most of the time, then drawing a bunch of cards. Blood on the Snow is a board wipe that'll let us return a creature based on how much snow mana was spent to cast it. It does cap out at 6, since the spell's mana value is 6, and then Tundra Fumarole is a red removal spell that generates generic mana based on how much snow mana was spent to cast it. But what creatures do we want to turn into snow creatures? My first thought was like Eldrazi or Big Dumb Beaters, but that doesn't really do anything. Well, what about modified creatures? See, a creature is considered modified if it's equipped, enchanted by their controller, or has any type of counter on them, and we are putting ice counters on these creatures so we can make them modified. Thundering Raiju, Kodama of the West Tree, and Aki Battle Squad all care about modified creatures. Thundering Raiju deals X damage to each opponent for each modified creature we control, other than creatures named Thundering Raiju, and puts a +1/+1 counter on a creature when it attacks. Kodama gives all modified creatures trample, and whenever they deal combat damage, we can search our library for a basic land card and put it onto the battlefield tapped. And Aki Battle Squad gives us an additional combat once each turn for all our modified creatures. Speaking of counters, some of my favorite counters matter cards I was able to include in this deck. Denry Klin, Editor-in-Chief, Nesting Ground, and Resourceful Defense. Denry puts the same number and kinds of counters that are on them onto any non-token creature when they enter the battlefield. So if we have an ice counter on Denry, whenever a non-token enters, it then also gets an ice counter. Nesting Ground lets us move counters once each turn, while Resourceful Defense will let us move counters from a permanent that leaves the battlefield to another permanent we control. With Rhymefeather Owl being our hidden commander, we need to be able to get it into play. So I included a bunch of cheap tutors to act as additional copies of the creature. I included about 6 total, but my favorites are Search for Glory, Primal Command, and Fierce Empath. Search for Glory lets us find any snow permanent, legendary card, or saga, and then we gain life for each snow mana spent to cast it. This also lets us find some of our win conditions, which we'll go over later on in the video. Next is Primal Command. This is a great modal spell, and I'm not going to go over all of the options, but there is a quick rules note I'd like to go over. Modal spells like this will resolve in the order that they're listed on the card, which means if Rhymefeather is in our graveyard, we can use Primal Command to shuffle our graveyard into our library and then tutor out Rhymefeather Owl into our hand. We can also shuffle away a problematic non-creature permanent by putting it on top of target player's library, then forcing them to shuffle their graveyard into their deck. Then we have Fierce Empath that when it enters the battlefield, we search our library for a creature with mana value 6 or higher. Rhymefeather Owl is 7 mana, so we can get it off this card. But how are we going to win with this deck? Well, Merit Lodge's Slumber, Diamond Fairy, and Icebreaker Kraken's how. Merit Lodge's Slumber is a legendary snow enchantment that when we control 10 or more snow permanents at the beginning of our upkeep, we sacrifice it and create Merit Lodge, a 2020 flying indestructible creature token. Diamond Fairy lets us pump all of our snow creatures and snowball into a victory. And finally, Icebreaker Kraken, which will tap down all of target opponent's creatures for a turn and let us swing in for victory. For upgrades, I wasn't quite sure what to really do here. Most snow cards are pretty inexpensive. If you want to lean more into the counter theme, you can add cards like Uzalith, Luxor Gyada's Gift, or Doubling Season. You could also change the commander to something not as memey, like Kenrith, Eska, or Ramos, but I think those commanders draw too much hate, so I avoided them. And with that, thanks for watching the video. As always, I'll include a link to the deck in the video description below. If you liked that video, click that like button. If you disliked it, hit that dislike button. Please leave any feedback, good or bad, in the comment section below so I can keep improving. Don't forget to subscribe and ring that bell to get notifications when all my videos go live. And if you'd like to have your own personal deck tech done, you can sign up for my Patreon, which I have linked in the video description below. As always, this has been Ben with BathroomBrewsMTG, and remember, always wash your hands.